Robert Plant's crotch bulge. Documents with blacked out lines. Welcome to Rock and Roll Conspiracies. Conspiracies. Hi there, I'm Colin Lamb, aka The Tone Wizard, and welcome to episode 1 of Rock and Roll Conspiracies. Now, right off the bat, you may notice that I'm wearing a fucking tinfoil hat, and I have to take it off because we got a little bit of heat up here in Canada this week, and that thing is roasting my goddamn dome off. Second of all, if my wife comes home and sees how much foil I've used to make that, a prop for my unmonetized YouTube channel, of which I'm producing content during my regular working hours, I'm going to be in a world of pain. So it's best to tuck that bad boy away unless I truly need it. So this is a new series that I'm going to be doing, and I'm going to start today's the first episode here off pretty lightly, and then I kind of want to move into weird territory. I have a couple of ideas for some conspiracies that I want to look into, but as with all the content on my channel, if you have something you'd like me to look into, please let me know, because if you are new here, I just want to let you know that a lot of the content that I make is inspired by comments and feedback and arguments and some of the insults that I receive in the comments, and that's truthfully what makes this channel worth doing for me. I like interacting with people, and I like to look into shit, especially that I may have never checked out before and have no idea about. So, with any event, let's get right into it. Rock and Roll Conspiracies, episode number 1. So a while back, one lonely COVID Saturday evening, I was up very late. I was crushing beer after beer after beer, watching YouTube video after YouTube video after YouTube video on a seemingly endless stream, which is something you might be doing right now at this very moment, in which case I see you, my friend. But yeah, I was up late watching the videos, and footage of the Dirty Mac performing Yes, I'm Lonely Wanna Die came up. And it's footage that I've seen many, many times, but never given much thought to. If you don't know what it is basically, it was a supergroup with John Lennon, Eric Clapton, Mitch Mitchell, and Keith Richards, and they performed Yes, I'm Only Wanna Die off the Beatles' White Album. And it was a one-time sort of shot off of something that I knew to be called the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. And I was watching that footage, and I'd seen the footage of the Stones playing from the same concert. I'd seen some footage of Jethro Tull playing because, interestingly enough, they had Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath playing guitar for them, which I thought was cool. But I hadn't seen much else from that, and so I was watching away, and the next video in the queue happened to be the footage of The Who played that same event. And I'm not really a big Who fan. A lot of the recorded stuff, the stuff I've heard on the radio, I'm not really into it. It's just never done much for me. But this footage fucking blew me away. They started off playing something called A Quick One While He's Away. It's like the band together on stage doing a 4-part harmony. It looks like they've done it a million times because it's fucking seamless. It was theatrical. It was entertaining. They're done up in all the 60s regalia. Roger Daltrey has the fucking leather tassel suit on. Pete Townsend's doing the full fucking windmill. John Entwistle's hands are just fucking flying on the bass, and Keith Moon is playing the drum kit. I can't even describe his. I've never seen a lot of concert footage, and maybe I'm a fucking newbie here, but it blew my fucking mind away. I mean, Keith Moon's playing on the kit. He doesn't even have a hi-hat. The whole songs are just continuous fills. It's absolutely fucking amazing. And at one point, he picks up the tom and just clacks away on it when they go into this kind of slow portion of it. Anyways, the footage blew my fucking mind away. And I was questioning why I'd never seen it before. I ended up going on a whole tangent watching footage of them from the Isle of Wight festival, and it was great. It got me into the Who. I love the live Who. It's fantastic. But I was kind of curious as to why I hadn't seen that footage before. Now, here's where we get into the conspiracy angle, folks, because when I looked into it, when I just searched up the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, one of the very first things that I found was a number of articles that basically stated that the Rolling Stones canceled the release of the movie because The Who came in and blew them off the stage at their own show. And there is the conspiracy that The Who embarrassed the Rolling Stones, causing them to cancel the release of the Rock and Roll Circus film. All right, so is there any truth to this? Well, I think before I start doing any research, I need to kind of consider who would benefit from the perpetuation. I've done like 5 takes of this, and every time I need to say that P word, it fucking comes out wrong. So let me just say it like this. Who stands to benefit from this being true, right? So there's obviously the bands, the individual band members, right? We know that there are some pretty large egos involved in this story. I mean, Mick Jagger needs no introduction on that note. And I'm not trying to tear him down, but I've heard many stories about Mick Jagger and his ego, including one interesting story where the Rolling Stones were staying at a hotel, and Mick Jagger called up the drummer Charlie Watts in the middle of the night and told him he needed his drummer to get over to his room. And Charlie Watts apparently dressed himself up sharply in a suit, as Charlie Watts is often to do. He went up to Mick Jagger's room, knocked on the door, and asked to see his singer, and then punched Mick Jagger in the face. And that's the story as I remember it. Also, I mean, Pete Townsend's ego needs no introduction. I was listening to a CBC radio program a while ago. They had Pete Townsend on, and his words were, Keith Moon was a genius. John Entwistle was a genius. He felt that himself, Pete Townsend, was close to being a genius, but that Roger Daltrey was just a singer, right? So we obviously know there's egos involved in there. I'm not trying to tear the guys down. I mean, obviously it was the 60s. This is a British invasion. These are the most famous men on earth. They're making some of the most influential music in the history of the world, and certainly the most influential art and music of the last century. So why the fuck wouldn't there be egos, right? People were sticking themselves into everything that would accept them. Everything was crazy. It was a great time. It was the 60s. So why would there not be egos? I don't fucking know. So we know that the bands would be a little bit riled up. And obviously, the Who benefits if they say we played the Stones off the stage, and that's why they didn't put the video out. And from an integrity perspective, if the Rolling Stones felt that they were upstaged and they didn't want to release the footage, or that there was something wrong with the footage, they would benefit from it not coming out either. So those are the obvious combatants. And I would say next we have the strangely tribal nature of rock fans, the fans themselves. We are tribal, right? I've talked on my channel before about Fish versus Ween, about Metallica versus Megadeth. We all know about the Rolling Stones versus the Beatles. And a lot of times those rivalries exist within the fan base, but not actually within the groups. And it turns out in the case of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones that they were definitely good friends. So those would be the people that would stand to gain or to lose here. Okay, so just to give you a little background information for context, the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus was a concert show organized by the Rolling Stones on December 11th, 1968. The show was filmed on a circus-themed stage, which is a tongue twister. I've had to do multiple fucking takes of this goddamn shot. A, because the camera keeps going out of focus, but also because I can't say circus-themed stage. Anyhow, move past that. Anyways, the show featured Jethro Tull, The Who, Taj Mahal, Marianne Faithfull, and the Rolling Stones. John Lennon also performed as in the supergroup called the Dirty Mac, which featured himself, Mitch Mitchell on drums, Eric Clapton on lead guitar, and Keith Richards on the bass. And again, that's how I originally found this series of footage, and I love it. I wish that band would have made an album, you know? Maybe John Lennon would still be alive if he was in the Dirty Mac. Maybe Jimi Hendrix would still be alive if the Dirty Mac made an album and toured and all that. We'll never know. The Dirty Mac could have saved rock and roll. Is it outrageous? Well, look into my eyes and tell me what you think. Anyhow, just gleaning through this Wikipedia page here, which is where I started when I was looking into the conspiracy theory, because a lot of the stuff on Wikipedia is cited and therefore tends to be somewhat reliable, or at least rooted in some kind of conceivable truth. But I'll summarize the Wikipedia page and the important notes here, folks. Colin's notes here. Basically what they're saying was that filming took a lot longer than they thought it would, changing the film canisters, etc. And the concert started at 2 p.m. on December 11th, but the Rolling Stones didn't hit the stage until 5 o'clock in the morning on December the 12th. So let's just take ourselves back and imagine ourselves at this concert in the 60s. People are definitely doing some of those famous 60s vitamins. They're probably drinking. They're flying all over the place. They've seen all these great rock acts. And then the Rolling Stones Stones get on stage at 5 o'clock in the morning, and apparently everybody was exhausted. Now, also factoring into this was the fact that Brian Jones at this point was in pretty deteriorating condition. He was struggling with consumption issues and mental issues and a host of other things that we don't want to get into, but that was actually noted by Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull, and he said, quote, Brian Jones was well past his sell-by date by then. We spoke to Brian. He really didn't know what was going on. He was rather cut off from the others. There was a lot of embarrassed silence, but a delightful chap, and we felt rather sorry for him. And that is about the most British way that you can end the devastating sentences that came before that. Yes, his life was spiraling out of control. He didn't know what was going on, but he was a wonderful chap. And if you've ever seen Ian Anderson talk as well, it's even funnier because I can definitely hear his voice saying, I got some coloring issues going on with the camera here too. Some focusing issues. First episode's kind of going off the rails here, but we're just going to keep plowing through. I'm going to put links to all this stuff, and you can check out these articles that I'm going to go through. But furthermore, in the Wikipedia article, it also alludes to some technical issues that they were having, and says that the project was abandoned until director Michael Lindsay Hogg attempted to edit the film in 1992, but due to missing principal footage, the project was put on hold, and that it eventually came out in 1996 in the format that most of us have seen it online in little snippets on the Vimeo page and stuff like that. I actually tried to find a place where I could watch the whole thing, and to buy it was very expensive, so I just chose to watch it in the licensed segments that are up there, and I'll put links to those as well. Let's see what else we got.
Conspiracy theory.
All right, another article that I found about the subject was on Showbiz Cheat Sheet, certainly one of the most credible news outlets in existence for rock and roll and world matters, I would imagine. But right in the middle of their article, entitled, Why Did the Rolling Stones Keep the Rock and Roll Circus Hidden for 28 Years? In the middle, there's an interesting portion there that says, as the Stones' performance only circulated in limited circles as a bootleg, The Who's Rock and Roll Circus set went public in the band's The Kids Are All Right documentary, which was put out in 1979. So I haven't seen that, but I'm going to go ahead and assume that they featured their footage from that night in there. That fueled the theory that the Stones kept the footage under wraps because they'd felt upstaged. Speaking to Mojo later, Pete Townsend certainly didn't question who played best that night. And there's a link to that article as well, which I didn't read, but I might check out later. When the Stones really get moving, he said, there's a kind of white magic that starts to replace the black magic, and everything starts to really fly. That didn't happen on this occasion. There's no question about that. They weren't just usurped by The Who, they were also usurped by Taj Mahal. So apparently Pete thought that Taj Mahal played a little better, and if I'm going to be honest with you, the Dirty Mac also upstaged them. So there's more fuel to the fire coming from the mouth of Pete Townsend himself. And it's starting to form somewhat of a conclusive picture. Let's see what else we can find. This is another article that I found from Vulture. Vulture is the online publication. I think they were the first to break the news that Gandhi had landed on Mercury. You'd have to double check my sources on that, but very nice publication, lots of good stories in there. This is an interview that they did with Lindsay Hogg, who was the director of the film, and a couple of interesting parts here. This section down here towards the bottom, of course, this will be linked in the description of the video, but the question presented to Folklore by Vulture was, geez, what a sentence. The question presented by Vulture to Lindsay Hogg was, the folklore that evidently emerged was that Mick was jealous of the Who outperforming the Stones, so he wanted to ensure the footage was buried. Is there much truth to that? So, the director of the film said, it wasn't so much that Mick thought the Who was better, it was that the Rolling Stones weren't as good as they usually were. It was partially because Brian Jones wasn't well. He couldn't really contribute at all on the guitar except for a few chords. They also didn't go on stage till about 2 a.m. or 5 a.m., I guess, depending on which article you read. They'd been hanging around all day, which took its toll a little bit. I think that means they were drinking and carrying on. There was probably fornication, rampant fornication, definitely, 100%. They were tired and maybe drugged out, maybe. There was also the idea that we were going to come back the next day to reshoot the Stones, but it was too expensive to keep the studio for another day. And ultimately, Mick understood they weren't as hot as they could have been and acknowledged the Who was quite good. So that seems to summarize again most of what we've been hearing. Since you and Pete have remained, this is another question that was asked of Mr. Hogg, of the Hog. Why did I do that? Since you and Pete have remained friendly with each other, has he ever brought up this performance through the years? No, everybody had kind of moved on after that day, including Pete. As weird as that may sound, The Who was on their way to building an enormous career, and that's what they were focused on. I think he's looked back on it privately, perhaps. Anyways, that's a bit of a paraphrasing of what he said there. So basically, the director of the film and the guy who originally was making it and put it out later said that Mick didn't like the footage and doesn't confirm it, but kind of does confirm it. And what we're starting to get a picture of here, in my mind, based on all these sources, is that there were two things going on. One being it was poorly planned, and two being The Who did play very well, but it's not conclusive as to whether that was the reason why the footage wasn't put out, or if it was just a fucking absolute calamity shit show style amalgamation of circumstances, including lost footage, technical problems, people being tired, people spiraling out of control, i.e. Brian Jones. And it seems to be at this point, from what I've read, that it's a calamity of reasons why this thing wasn't put out. But let's check out one more source, shall we? Go check out this article from loudersound.com because it features interviews from multiple people who were there at the scene, including Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull, the flautist himself, and just a bunch of other people. The bassist from Jethro Tull, journalist who was there with Melody Maker, journalist who was there with MME, and a fan who was there. So you kind of get a bunch of different perspectives of what was going on. And actually, there's even a portion of this where Glenn Cornick talks about how horrible the bass sound was for the Dirty Mac because Keith Richards wanted to play through a guitar amp or something like that. Anyways, check it out. Ian Anderson also kind of comments, and you kind of heard what he had to say in the Wikipedia article. And there is a fan's perspective as well. And let me just see if I can find something. And Glyn Johns as well, famous Beatles sound engineer, who says... right here, he says, I think the biggest concern that everybody had was that the audience was getting tired. And multiple times throughout this, people talk about how long it dragged on, how it was cold, it was December, and they were in this big studio. And there was a bunch of shit going on. But that kind of ties into why maybe the Stones didn't have a good performance, but doesn't really explain why The Who played so well. Yeah, there's tons of stuff in here. I really recommend you go check out this article. I'm not going to sit here and read it all for you. I think that would be doing a disservice to my audience and to this fine article that you should go and read for yourself. So what are my conclusions after, I've read an article from Wikipedia, of course, which is cited and generally considered to be reliable, depending what you're reading. I've read through interviews with the film's director himself, other interviews with people who were there and have firsthand accounts from kind of multiple angles of the event, journalists, band members, audience members. And what are the conclusions? Well, my conclusion, I think, is that there's not really a conspiracy theory here, and that the reason why the film wasn't put out for so long was a number of reasons. First of all, it seemed to be a fucking disaster from start to finish. There were drugs and alcohol involved, and nobody was saying no to the likes of Mick Jagger or Pete Townsend or John Lennon at the time. So the monkeys had control of the asylum, or the monkeys controlled the zoo, or the zoo controlled the circus. I don't know what I'm trying to say there, but basically it was a shit show, and it didn't get put out because it was a shit show. And years later, I'm glad that it did get put out because I really enjoyed it. I'm gonna take this hat off again. My head is fucking roasting. But you know what? This thing is actually pretty good for the lighting. So a little pro YouTube tip if you're having some focus. Look at this. It's shit now. I had the fucking tinfoil. That's the real conspiracy here. The tinfoil makes a bald man look better on camera. Anyways, thank you for watching. This is episode number 1. I'm hoping to streamline the process a little bit. I've had some difficulties putting it together. Let me know what you think. Let me know what your thoughts are on this. If you have some conspiracies that you'd like me to look into, I have the time and I would very much like to look into them. If you're new here, please subscribe to my channel and like the video. And hey, take good care of yourselves out there, because the truth might be I didn't have a proper outro line prepared there. But the truth, I thought I could come up with one there. It didn't happen. Colin Lamb, a.k.a. the Tone Wizard. Take care of yourself.